Hello, I'm the Drum. Welcome to Socially Challenged. Who are you then?
Hey, my name is Timothy Armoo. I'm the CEO of Fan Bytes, and what we do is we help the world's biggest brands to reach younger audiences on social media. And I'm a judge for the Drum Social Media Award.
Thanks for joining us and for being part of the jury for the Drum Awards for social media. I'm going to ask you some questions about audience building. Are you ready?
Yes, I am. Let's go.
Then let's begin. What is the main secret to building an audience on social media platforms?
There are a lot. The main secret would probably be just fully understanding and appreciating that people follow people on social media as opposed to people following brands or companies. And so humanizing your brand in every single facet, every single post that you put out is probably the easiest way to grow an audience in a short space of time. There's a reason why, for example, you see influencers grow quite quickly because they're just like people in of themselves. And so that, if it is any secret, would probably be what I'd tell people to do, would be to focus on humanizing themselves on whichever social platform they're on. Once you've done that, everything else is pretty secondary. You know, LinkedIn has its tactics, Twitter has its tactics, TikTok has its tactics, but the strategy of humanizing your brand is probably the underlying secret for anyone who really wants to win, because people follow people, people don't follow brands or companies.
Which social media tools would you recommend for audience building?
Contrary to popular thought, I'm not a huge fan of social media tools, primarily because I feel like they almost take too much of the intrinsic work that you have to do in order to build a really good profile. So, of course, there's things like scheduling tools, like the Buffers, Hootsuite of the world. But the ones that really work for me are those that give you an insight into audience sentiment and how people are feeling. So things like SimilarWeb, for example, that's my personal favorite tool because it tells me, right, like what are people searching, what are people talking about. But the reason why in general I'm kind of against tools is because I feel like that insight and that intuition as to what people are talking about should just be driven by you as a person. And those tools are there primarily to maybe help you to get things out quicker, faster, at scale. But really the core of it should come from you as a person, understanding your audience, understanding what they're talking about, and then figuring out how to give your own take on the matter.
What one mistake would you advise any company to avoid doing over social media?
There's so many mistakes. Can I give two? If I can give two, then what I would do, first one is, well, the complete opposite of what I've said, which is by effectively just going out with a corporate messages the whole time and going out with basically thinking there is a divide between the person who is actually tweeting, etc., and what the brand actually stands for. And so when there is that divide, people can see through it and you just easily get forgotten. And there are several ways in which you can still be that corporate entity, but still be able to maintain that voice. Nike do a very good job of this by actually taking a stand in any of the key discussions and issues that are going on in the world. So that's the first one. The second one, I think, is also going and not understanding that every platform has its way of actually navigating and growing on there. So a very good example, if I think about my line of work, which is primarily helping brands to reach a Gen Z audience, you have people coming to us with stuff that's worked on YouTube or Instagram and then going and saying, can we do that on TikTok? Or people who are doing on Twitter and saying, can we do it on Instagram? And what happens is it just takes a bit of effort, just an extra bit of effort for you to understand the way to turn your message to something that fits the platform. But so many people just have this apathy and this kind of like, oh, well, hopefully we get some likes and we'll get some comments. But rather than focus on just the activity, and they're focusing more on just let's just get this out rather than actually focusing on the output. So those are the two things I'd say. Firstly is this idea of just still being this corporate entity still on social media, and secondly not understanding that each platform has its own tactics and rules, and that's what you should be focusing on, just with an extra bit of effort and creativity.
What one thing really annoys you on social media?
I think authentic is one of the most, I don't know if I can swear on this, but I think one of the most bullshit words that at every conference, at everything that I hear, authentic, authentic. And that really frustrates me. And the reason why it frustrates me is because it is one of those very woolly terms where it's like, yes, in principle, brands should be authentic. But it's also kind of doesn't tell you really anything. It just says, right, like, be authentic, be true to yourself. And for me, that there is very bad advice because it's just like, well, just 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 be yourself. And often what can happen is, going back to my earlier point about like people buying from people, you do have to be a person on social media, but you also have to like construct some kind of brand for yourself. So one of my favorite brands is actually a brand which I don't think they're stocked in the UK, but they're called DiGiorno. They're a pizza brand, and they are absolutely brilliant on Twitter, Facebook, etc. Because so much of their content is like meme content, funny content, but it's still a brand they've created, but it's a brand that's true to themselves. They don't need to fake authenticity, because that's another thing. When people say be authentic, then what happens is people try and fake authenticity, and it gets to this bizarre stage where your brand is just in the middle, not really having any sense of identity there. So that to me is probably a term which I hate a lot.
Which social media account should every social media manager follow and why?
There are a whole range of these accounts, Burger King and all these people do quite well. But for me, my favorite is a brand called DiGiorno. I really like them because if you actually go through their tweets, especially on Twitter, if you actually go through their tweets, probably about 80% of them have nothing to do with pizza. They're just like completely random stuff. And, if I look, for example, at some of the most recent tweets, they're talking about potatoes. So in the last tweet, they wrote like, potatoes are so versatile. That's it. That's the tweet. And you're like, this has nothing to do with pizza, but the whole thing that people on social media often say this thing where they will just say like a declarative statement and they go, that's it, that's the tweet. Like they've actually bought into that. And so just because of that, that tweet there had hundreds of thousands of impressions and all that stuff. People are going to come back to it, follow it and go, this is an interesting brand. So for me, they are a really, really good playbook for how to actually do it. So yeah, that'd be, I think you can learn also a lot from how brands are creating content on the up and coming platforms. So brands who are creating content on TikTok, I think are pretty interesting. I think Lush Cosmetics, they've done something very interesting where they have every different location of Lush have their own TikTok account. And it's just quite interesting how people like compete with each other and they have a face to the brand. But for me, if I was to think about the number one I advise everyone to look at, it will be DiGiorno. I think they're absolutely great on Twitter.
What are you hoping to see from the entries to the social media awards?
For me, there are three things that I'm really looking to. And the first one is this idea of actually driving some meaningful, tangible output. So social media, I think for a while, a lot of people, and I just call them wild cowboys, have basically got away with selling impressions and, eyeballs, when really the fundamental thing is that social media should act as a revenue acceleration tool. So for me, I'm looking at campaigns and brands and agencies who've done work which has actually driven the bottom line. So that's the first one. The second one for me is to be able to dig into a conversation that people are already having. I think that is actually much harder to do than coming up with some idea and thinking we're going to brute force our way into it. Because the truth is, with any idea, with enough Facebook ad dollars and with enough just like social media spend behind it, you can make anything just kind of take off. The smart person is the person who can think, we're going to take this idea and we're going to weave it into an existing conversation people are actually having, or in a way in which people are actually feeling. And that is much harder to do, because for that you need empathy towards understanding the audience, what's going on, and then actually figuring out how your brand can play a role in there. And then for me, the third thing is slightly intangible, but it's also more about how does this campaign, how can it scale? And that's a question which a lot of people don't ask themselves when they think about a campaign. They think, right, like, this campaign worked to reach this amount of people, and that's great for this period of time. But if we were trying to now scale this to like 10 times the people, is it possible to take that same idea and then like scale it just with some more spend, or just with some more distribution? And that to me is where you get the best ideas, where the campaign execution, the campaign creative is so strong that you can scale it beyond just needing even that much more paid spend. So those are the three things that I'm looking for when I think about who is going to be good and who I'm going to actually vote for at the social media awards.
It's been lovely talking to you today. Thank you for your answers, and good luck judging the Drum Awards for social media.